afternoon to everyone. Thanks for coming, and especially thanks for spending your time with us. I know that it is the last session of the day, and it might be very, very tiring already to listen to us. And especially hi to all the familiar faces we have in the space. Thanks a lot for your effort for coming and for supporting us. So this is the session called Who is Visible in Data Protection, and also we would like to add an anti-racist perspective for tech. Dear attendees, welcome, as I was saying before, to the last session, in which we will try to explore the lack of visibility of vulnerable individuals and communities in data protection debates. This is something that is really needed and that we hope we can give a little bit more light, or at least our little contribution in this first day of the conference. First of all, before we start, I would like to thank the organization CPDP for building the opportunity and the space to have the space to speak about this topic. My name is Oyidiya, and I'm a policy and advocacy advisor for ENAR, which is the European Network Against Racism. At our organization, we envision digital rights as an extension of human rights. In my case, my work area is digital rights specifically, and it is something that is really new for us. And of course, for more than 150 organizations that are part of our network, we witness that vulnerable communities are an important driving force of the digital landscape. It is something that we cannot deny. Their presence, it's always there, but it's always invisibilized. For example, we see that it is impossible to imagine the technology we have right now without acknowledging their contribution, especially from people of color, to what we all agree that it's called innovation. However, their significant input that does not seem to be enough to recognize and support the harms that they suffer when their data privacy is breached or is violated. Marginalized communities have a unique privacy-related needs and behaviors that must be also acknowledged. And because of this, for vulnerable groups, privacy is not an individual act. It's something that has to be made in community, or at least that they would like to have it more shared in groups. Likewise, there's a lot of invisible labor that these people have to do in order to fight the power or to protect their data privacy. They have to do lots of things. They have to go through all social media platforms, for example, to read everything in order to make sure that the data privacy, in many cases, it's at least being kept. And with these four panelists that we have today, which I agree that they are super amazing and they are really nice colleagues to be working on, we will explore these and other related topics. And with no further ado, I would like to present them. And I would like to present the people who are here today. So I will start with Tebogo Mazibuko. She's a South African citizen and a permanent German resident. She holds a master's in international business law and a degree from the Vrije Universiteit from Amsterdam, and an MBA international management from Munich Business School. Also, she's a certified compliance officer, TUV, with over 10 years of consulting experience in the private sector. Since 2020, she focused her work in EU compliance management and data protection and digital ethics. With us, we also have Osama Al-Sayed. He's an Egyptian investigative journalist based in the Netherlands. He currently holds the position of co-managing editor at Arabi Facts Hub, which is located in New York. This organization, the Arabic Facts Hub, is an innovative, pioneering effort to use technology and specifically machine learning to help address misinformation in the Arabic context online, and particularly towards minority groups. He has worked also on other projects that use data for positive social change and is a member of several cross-border investigation teams. We also have with us Oumaima Hajri. She is a Moroccan-Dutch interdisciplinary researcher and lecturer focusing on the intersection of AI, ethics, and society. She holds a bachelor in political science, a master's in data science, and is currently pursuing a master's in AI ethics and society. Her work focuses on translating ethical AI strategic interventions into meaningful practices, as well as the decolonization and demystification of AI. She is also the founder of the Alliance Against Military AI, and she is a volunteer at FEMYSO, which is one of our members. FEMYSO is the Forum of European Muslim and Student Organizations. And last but not least, we have Naomi Appelman. She's a Dutch PhD researcher at the University of Amsterdam, and she's the co-founder of Racism and Technology Center. She is interested in the intersection between technology and social justice, and her research focuses on the role of law in online exclusion, the contestability of speech governance, and platform power. So first, I would like to thank you all for being to dare to speak about this topic, which is something that not so many people would like to speak, and also because it's I can say that it is not a topic that it's really broadly spoken usually. Let's say globally, it is not something that that can be we can talk about the data vulnerability of people of color, for example, but other kind of marginalized communities. So first of all, I would like to ask you to Osama and Naomi, what is the experience that you think, that it is in terms of privacy and data protection for vulnerable groups? Maybe Osama, you can start.
Thanks, Sonia, for inviting me, and thanks for everyone for coming. I'm co-managing editor for a platform called Arabi Facts Hub. We are trying to build a database, open source database for the fact checkers, for the investigative journalists, for the researchers, just to follow and track the patterns of the disinformation and the data privacy invasions in the Arab world. So we have faced many experiences with that that topic. So I will start with a personal story, actually, about the data privacy. I'm a refugee in the Netherlands because I can't work in my country. So the first situation that I have faced in the Netherlands was a policeman who was taking me to the police station as an asylum seeker, and he just asked me to give him the password for my mobile phone to unlock it. And I gave it the password, and he started to make a copy of my data with that. So that's the reality for the vulnerable groups in Europe. I mean, in France, it's not that far. We are talking about the Interior Ministry. They're asking the schools to provide them with a data of the students who were absent after Ramadan because of Eid al-Fitr. And they said this is because of the public transportation. We're trying to make calculations for the public transportation, but actually because of the Muslim students. So that's the level of the reality. That's the reality for the minorities in Europe about the data privacy. But here there is awareness, actually. It's not like my homeland. I mean, the data privacy here, I'm talking about providing data for the Interior Ministry of the Netherlands or the Interior Ministry of France or whatever. But in our countries, it's much more complicated than that. It affects our lives, but people doesn't know about that. I mean, I have tens of examples about that. The first one, there is a girl in I'm trying to explain why it's not a luxury when we are talking about that in the Arab world. Because, I mean, the companies, like, they didn't give any like understanding for what's happening on the Arab world, because like they don't have that much people who are speaking Arabic on these platforms, especially Facebook and Twitter. Now it's getting better a bit, but it's not that great. I mean, we have like a blackmailing, like online blackmailing for the women on Facebook, on Twitter, on different platforms, and we are trying to follow this and track this through our work. So we found that there is people who was like committing suicide, like based on these incidents. It's horrible. I mean, it's in our society. When there is like personal or private photos on the Facebook, we are trying to like complain or like just make like we are trying to tell the Facebook that it's a private photos, and they are blackmailing this girl, but it's staying for like days and weeks without any reaction from the Facebook. So it's something horrible. I mean, this girl was like, she was a teenager. She can't bear all of the social problem that happened after that. And she committed suicide. She took her life because of something like that, because of the Facebook doesn't care, I mean, for her privacy or for her data. That's also, we have a girl, a student in Mansoura University. This is a city on the Delta River in Egypt. This girl, she said no for her ex-boyfriend. I don't want to marry you, and he started to like chasing her everywhere, and he killed her. But after that, there was like it's not about that. It's about like her private life. I mean, people were trying to justify this act by publishing her private photos, like she's wearing specific clothes, and like this is in Egypt, they are trying to say, oh, he killed her because she's wearing specific kind of clothes and blah blah blah. So, and we try to say like to Facebook, this is something horrible for her family and for everything, and the response was too late for that. And there was a groups on the Facebook that like preaches like things private for girls, for like, I mean, LGBT community, for, I mean, even the interior ministry in Egypt, they are using the dating apps just to trying to like arrest the LGBT community in Egypt. And these apps are like they letting them do whatever they want without any accountability. So what I'm trying to say, the reality in Europe and the reality outside Europe is so bad. I mean, we are facing something critical on the digital sphere in the Arab world without any kind of awareness. I mean, people were talking about these incidents and with different aspects, but the aspect of, or the perspective of the data privacy wasn't there. And I mean, when we are talking with Facebook or Twitter, or they said we are doing our best to hire people from the, but it's not enough. That's what I'm seeing. It's not enough.
Okay, thank you, Osama. Maybe Naomi, do you have any answer also to this question about the experience of data privacy and what the protection of data, their protection, like in terms of how it is for vulnerable communities?
Yes, let's check if it's okay. Yeah, thank you, Oyidiya, and also thank you, Osama. I have a small contribution from a bit of a different perspective from the context of education, higher education, based on the work I've been doing with the Racism and Technology Center. My colleague Jill Toe is here, so in the office, in the room, not the office. What I want to talk about is a case we have brought to the Dutch Human Rights Institute about racist facial detection algorithms. And I want to discuss this not to lobby for any specific data protection regulation we need in this regard, or how to regulate AI, but rather I want to use this to make a comment about what it means and what happens if you try to challenge these type of discriminatory systems and what we can learn from that. So let me first say a few words about the case itself. So as I mentioned, it's about facial detection software that we think is up to 30% worse in recognizing black and brown faces than white faces. And it was used in the context of higher education for, during the COVID lockdowns, proctoring online exams, right? So when students were taking their exams in their own living room, bedrooms, to ensure that they were not cheating or committing any type of horrible fraud. And the case is brought by Robin Pokorny, a master's student, and we've been working with her for the past 2 years now to try to challenge the use of what we believe is discriminatory software. So first, we tried to raise this issue with the university itself, right? To try to discuss it. But for up to a year, they made that impossible, and they did not want to take the complaint on. When they did, they rejected the complaint, and that's when we went to the Human Rights Institute to file the formal discrimination case. And so far, we've had an important win. We've, so to say, we've won the first round, and now we're finishing up the entire proceedings. So it's not fully done yet. And throughout this entire procedure, the university has chosen to really go all in with lawyers and litigate and challenge the case at any different point possible. So why do I want to discuss this case? Not only because I think it's a really good example of how technology can be discriminatory, how it can be racist, and how it can be harmful, but also because I think if we dive a bit deeper, it tells us some, it gives us some valuable insight of what it means to try and challenge these type of systems. And to get this insight, I think the work of the scholar Sarah Ahmed is extremely insightful. She's worked a lot on institutional responses to complaints, and one of her core points, if I try to summarize it, is that at some point, if you try to bring a challenge, if you try to raise an issue, in the eyes of the institution, you become the problem. So, because we're talking about racism specifically, I think it's necessary to connect this to the notions of hypervisibility and hyperinvisibility, which is discussed in a whole range of scholarly disciplines, but specifically critical race studies and developed by people like Frans Fanon, but also Toni Morrison. And I'm not doing them justice if I summarize it, but I'll try. The idea that based on specific characteristics, right, such as perceived race or skin color, one can be hypervisible. You're judged on that characteristic. You're followed based on it. You're focused on it based on that characteristic. But at the same time, paradoxically, it is that same perceived characteristic upon which people can be marginalized, minimized, ignored, made invisible. So the dynamic or the paradox of simultaneous hypervisibility and invisibility. So I think that the Sarah Ahmed's work and these two concepts are extremely valuable to illuminate what happened in this facial detection case. Because if we retell the story, in the beginning, the student, Robin, was literally invisible to the software, right? It did not detect her face, but also metaphorically invisible in the sense that the university refused to hear her complaint, did not listen to her, did not see her and her situation as legitimate or at all. Then when she finally was able to get into the official formal complaint proceedings due to a lot of persistence and tenacity on her side, the dynamic completely shifted. And you got into a situation where she became the problem, right? The institution is defending and protecting the software, and the student that tries to raise an issue is seen as the threat to that institution. So, wrapping up, I think these notions of hyper-invisibility and visibility and what happens if you try to raise a complaint are very insightful to think about what privacy means for vulnerable groups. That on the one hand, if you try to challenge a type of harm, that can also create a form of visibility that in and of itself can be very harmful and dangerous, and cannot be overlooked. And it also tells us that if we think about all these things, we cannot only focus on the technology, of course, right? The facial detection in this specific example, but need to see the entire context and also the entire context of the institutional response to trying to challenge these things. So there's many more to say about it, but I'll leave it at this for now.
Yeah, thank you, Naomi. I think that, from what you are saying and from what Osama was saying also, I think that there's no other option, right, than challenging. Especially when you're and also because there's a moment in which instead of being an individual who's complaining, you are the community. You're representing the community itself to go and complain and say, hey, I want this to be challenged, or I want my harms to be repaired in certain kind of way, because in the end, what happens with those harms, right? What happens with them, and what can we do with them? And because in the end, we don't want to finish, or we don't want to have an end, as for example, Osama was saying, in which there's people who have to take their lives because they don't see any other way to redirect their harms, right? Also, I don't know if Tebogo, maybe you can give us a little bit of insights about how we can make sure that the privacy of marginalized groups, people of color, LGBTQ, from other kind of perspectives, how can we make sure that they are really respected and that they can really move forward as the others are also moving forward?
Thank you so much for the question and for the very valuable contributions before me. I'd like to start my response by quoting US cryptographer Bruce Schneier, who said, "Privacy is an inherent human right and a requirement for maintaining the human condition with dignity and respect." So now, before I refer to some legal frameworks that protect this, I just want us to just hold for a moment and remember that privacy is a human right. Regardless of race, gender, socioeconomic background, heritage, migration, that's something I just would like for us to stick. Why, for me, looking at legal frameworks is particularly interesting. History has shown that laws change society, or that social events depict how laws will look like afterwards. So being a South African citizen, I can bear testimony to both. The harsh apartheid laws really wreaked havoc to so many aspects of society, of families, of individuals. And even though we got our official democracy in '94, we feel the impact of apartheid to this day. One example being that South Africa, year after year after year, has one of the highest Gini coefficients in the world, meaning it has the highest difference between the rich and the poor. I also feel quite fortunate to be able to bear testimony on the other side, to see that since our democracy, laws have developed that not only reflect our constitutional democracy that I'm very proud of, but also the kind of society that we wish to build. Just hold that thought. Okay. So in the context of privacy, this notion is protected, and especially in the context of the EU, right? By the EU Convention of Human Rights, as well as the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. I would like to quote, before I quote, it's very interesting about the EU specifically, is that the right to privacy, looking at historical texts, emanates from human dignity. And human dignity is recognized as an absolute fundamental right, which means there are no exceptions that are allowed by law to challenge or to reduce the human dignity of another. What's interesting, though, is even though the right to privacy emanates from human dignity, the right to privacy is not absolute. And I just want to quote an example from the European Convention on Human Rights in Article 8, which enshrines the right to respect for private and family life. Subarticle 8.1 reads, everyone, I'd like to underline, everyone has the right to respect for his private and family life, his home, and his correspondence. As I said, that the right to privacy, unlike human dignity, is not absolute. And this is evident in subarticle 2, which reads, there shall be no interference by public authority with the exercise of this right, except such as is in accordance with the law and is necessary in a democratic society in the interest of national security, whatever that means, the interest of public safety, is that everybody's public safety question, or the economic well-being of the country, certain people in the country, everyone, for the prevention of disorder or crime, etc. So to Oyidiya's question, how can it be ensured that all our privacy is protected, and even the privacy of the most vulnerable people? That is a tricky question, because I actually can't answer that. What I did, though, I had a look at the proposed EU AI Act, which is currently, which was actually not too long ago, tabled before the EU Parliament again. And it's supposed to be the first legislated AI Act, to serve across the European continent. And I was looking to certain provisions of it to see if I could answer your question, if there's a way that it may protect the privacy of vulnerable groups, especially in the context of the examples that Osama shared. So certain aspects, so Article 5 of the proposed AI Act prohibits certain types of AI practices. And examples of that, and I quote, exploits of any of the vulnerabilities of a specific group of persons due to their age, physical or mental disability that would materially distort their behavior. I just want to stop there because I find very interesting that vulnerability is reduced in this proposed draft to age, physical and mental disability, where the range of possible vulnerabilities is so much more vast than that. So while also looking at other provisions, I don't want to get into too legal technical, it looks very promising on paper. If you just Google racial profiling in Europe, you'll find pages and pages of examples of how public officials do not uphold, right, and thus extensively transgress the privacy of individuals, as unfortunately Osama has the recent personal experience. All we can do at this point is hope that it will bring at least some change. Remember earlier I said that sometimes it's legislation that brings about change in society. This could be it. Another provision that makes me hopeful is that the proposed AI Act relates to what it calls high-risk AI systems. And AI systems that fall into the category of high risk are those that pose significant harm to the health, safety, or, and I underline, or the fundamental rights of natural persons. It gives me hope that at least vulnerable are seen, and I hope that through this act, and mainly through the implementation and application of this legislation, the privacy of the most vulnerable will be protected. But I can't give you a definite answer for that.
No, I mean, there's not. I don't think anyone in the room has like the correct answer. If there is, But from what I can say from your exposition is that, or the questions that I was writing down actually are, who has hope, and therefore who doesn't have hope? Because that is also like something. I mean, there's people who can like really have the privilege to have hope, and there are others who don't have it, and who uses the hope as an instrument in order to give like certain kind of progress for some people and not for others. And also another question that probably we will discuss after with some drinks. It is, where's the hope for those who doesn't have it? Where can we find it? It is, I think it is very difficult to find it. I mean, there's people who doesn't have hope, and probably they started their lives in another country, let's say, for example, in case of people on the move, who were having hopes, but after the treatment they received, or after, because in the end, you have privacy, but in the end, there's people who have to give it in order to get in return certain kind of benefits, lives, better lives, whatever. I mean, and probably these people have lost their hope in the places where they wanted to settle, right? So I think there's like many more tasks apart from making sure that privacy works for everyone, that maybe we should also like try to discover, like probably in another conference. But yes, I think it is your contribution was really interesting. I would like also to continue with another question that also I would like again to address to you, Tebogo, and later for you, Oumaima, in which it would be good to try to understand the meaning of protecting data privacy for marginalized communities. Tebogo, what are your insights regarding this?
Yeah, I think the first question perhaps to ask, what does data privacy mean in the digital age? And the easiest answer to that is it's complicated. So the EU GDPR reminds me a bit of the South African Constitution, because of how it's written, and it provides us lots of hope, and the intent is really to create a just and equitable, a feeling of responsible society within Europe. For example, a whole chapter 3, is dedicated, it has detailed various aspects of data privacy rights, the principles, and includes that the data subjects has a right to be informed, and I quote, in a concise, transparent, intelligible, and easily accessible form, using clear and plain language, in particular for any information addressed specifically also to a child. I mean, this sounds ideal, right? However, the fact that there is a gap, so the legal framework is there, and I think the GDPR, the legislatures, the EU legislatures did a phenomenal job. I think it depends who you ask, but if you ask about the protection of our goods, it did a good job. But the fact that there is a gap between the legislative framework and the actual lived data privacy protection of individuals speaks to a much bigger problem, which will need to be debated. And there's no simple way to achieve and that ideal state where the data privacy of even the most vulnerable is protected. However, what is necessary is a multi-stakeholder, interdisciplinary, continuous efforts, continuous communication, involvement, engagement. I don't think we'll get around that in any other way.
Thank you, Tebogo. Oumaima, what you can say also about this topic or this question?
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't want to burst the hope bubble, but I think it's good to burst that bubble sometimes, because as you said, some people don't have the luxury to have hope or to be hopeful, I do believe that regulation and governance might be good steps in the right direction. But I would say that it's definitely not the solution. And to explain better why I am worried, I'd like to focus on the militarization of data. And Oyidiya mentioned earlier that I'm the founder of the Alliance Against Military AI, including many organizations that are also sitting here in the room, Hajri, ENAR, ECNL, POX, Bits of Freedom. So basically, the militarization of data focuses on the use of data or AI within national security or military context. So examples could be predictive policing, but also literally the use of data within targeted operations. And what is particularly interesting is that, you know, despite the laws that we have, despite the charters that we have, despite the guidelines, the frameworks that we have, that still to date, specific communities are victims of this militarization of data. And even if I dig a little bit deeper, we can see that these particular techniques or that these particular technologies are only deployed when assessing a particular kind of risk. So it's linked to a particular understanding of what we consider as risk and who we consider as being risky. And this is obviously also mainly linked to the other, to the marginalized, to bodies that are indistinguishable to the Western eye. And to relate it back to a technological context and the militarization of data, we can again take the example of predictive policing. So we could all question ourselves, why are these type of technologies and techniques only used to tackle particular types of crimes within particular types of neighborhoods? So again, to make it more concrete, why is predictive policing mainly used for blue-collar crimes, so street crime, and not for white-collar crimes, on the same scale at least, for example, money laundering? So, you know, another example is again the fact that within the AI Act, AI that is going to be used or developed within a military context or within a national security context is out of scope of the AI Act. So it is not going to be regulated within the AI Act. And you know, this indirectly leaves room for industry. It leaves room for other stakeholders that are building these technologies, that are using this data, and that are also benefiting from this data and these technologies to dictate their own rules and to have their own way of regulating these systems. And you know, the problem is that when these purposes are discussed and when we're talking about risk, is that we only tend to focus on the premise that innovation should not be slowed down. That is something that we all agree on. And in the case of military AI, why that is particularly problematic is that if we look at the arguments that are being used, for example, other geopolitical blocs are also building these systems, so we should do the same. And you see that there is little to no focus at all on the human rights implications when we're talking about military AI, because, you know, of course, it is very easy to philosophize about military AI if you are the developer or the manufacturer, but you're not the target. It's very easy to philosophize about military AI if the data that is being collected is not your data. It's very easy to philosophize about these systems if they are not going to be tested on your grounds, because the EU is not going to test these systems here in the EU, but in peripheral countries perhaps. So, you know, what I'm trying to say is that in the end, I'm really not trying to be pessimistic here, but it's really not only about these legal protections, these laws, because we also need to critically reflect on how we are implementing them. When do we choose to comply with them, and when do we not? And why are we being selective, and towards whom? Because as long as our systems or institutions are infected with institutional racism, with institutional discrimination, these mechanisms, these laws, these regulations will also continue to benefit some and continue to further marginalize others. And to conclude, you know, within the EU, we are so eager always to promote our values of democracy, of freedom, of the rule of law, that are obviously all inherently linked to data protection. But at the same time, at our own borders of the Union, I'm not talking about other countries outside of the Union. So at our own border, we are using these technologies to push away certain bodies that are considered as risk, to welcome certain asylum seekers and refugees within our union, and to actively push away others that are, again, as I said, considered as risk and that are indistinguishable to the Western eye. So I can rant for a little bit longer, but just to conclude, this is really something to critically reflect about and to take into consideration when we are drafting these proposals, when we are drafting these guidelines and these laws and these acts. Who is going to benefit from these laws and who is going to be marginalized even further?
Maybe, Maima, something that I would ask you. Sorry. Maybe something that I would ask you, or maybe one of the ideas that comes out after your intervention is that maybe data privacy is only for people who are not considered as a risk. Yeah, sure.
Well, definitely, I think the example that Osama gave at the beginning, that he literally had to give his phone and unlock it so that the police officer can gain access to his data. This is something that would be ridiculous if you would, for example, state it in the same context, maybe with other refugees or within other contexts in general. So I really do think that indeed, in the end, data can be used for the good. And we see that within, for example, refugee camps, that data is being used to provide help for certain refugees. They can get their food, etc. But then again, why do these refugees, for example, need to provide their biometric data in order to get help, in order to get food? And if they are providing this biometric data, what is happening with this data? Who has agency over this data? Can they actually refuse to give these biometric data? And if they do so, are they still going to be are they still going to be helped? Are they still going to be accepted within that camp? And this is only a small example. Even in the Netherlands, a couple of months ago, I saw that there was a job position for, in Dutch we say, screening medewerker. So it's someone who basically screens and scrapes social media pages of refugees and asylum seekers that are coming into the countries to try and see if there are any correlations or maybe risk indicators to not accept that particular asylum seeker or refugee in the camp or in the Netherlands, in Ter Apel, in that center. So what is happening with that data, and why is that okay in that context and not in others?
And do you know exactly what were the requirements for that job? Like, what do you need to know in order to screen that?
You needed to be analytic.
Mm-hmm.
So
wow.
I'm not really sure what that means in that context, but you needed to be analytic.
Suspicious, maybe, instead of analytic? Yeah, probably. We could see, like, it would be interesting also, like, to maybe just go some of ourselves, just try to apply to that job and see who's in the end, who's the one who's elected, right? So just to finish, maybe I would like to have contributions from different people from you. About how technology can be reimagined without harming those communities, or if it's possible, and if anti-racism or having this kind of perspective can help to find a solution. Maybe we can start with you, Sama.
So I'm going to take about the profit. When you put the profit on the first thing, it's disregarding the importance of privacy. So that you have militias now, they have access to Twitter Blue, and they planning campaigns against the minorities in Iraq, for example, and the same in Lebanon. So when you are talking about the profit, I mean, there is no space for the privacy. This is, so when you are talking about the hub, I mean, the best way to combat the digital harm or the privacy or the invasion and the misinformation, I think can be done by prioritizing ethical considerations, accountability, and the transparency among like stakeholders, like such setting standards for data protection, privacy, security, and holding technology companies responsible for any negative impacts. Number two, I think engaging these groups, these communities in the decision-making processes related to technology, like that can help ensure that their needs are and perspectives are taken into consideration. Also, we can say it's something important to recognize how technology can reinforce systematic inequality and to take measures to ensure that the benefits of technology are distributed equitably across all the societies. So, I mean, our mission is like trying to catch the smoke in such an area, but I guess we have decided to tackle harmful content and privacy invasions by topic. I guess we have the journalists, and I guess we have the activists, the women's rights. I guess we have like the refugees, disinformation, and all of these areas. So we, as a Arabi Facts Hub, we also have a set of recommendations which we are working on for the civil society and human rights advocates, like decision makers, civil society organizations, and we are going to share it like very soon. I mean, there is a movement, but still we need to see the whole picture. We are not only, the data privacy violations, it's not only in Europe, it's outside Europe. And these technology companies, we don't have the judgery system to tackle them in the Middle East, but I guess in Europe there is a space for that.
Well, and also maybe to add, probably like the social media platforms that we use or that many people use in the Global South are imposed social media platforms. I mean, there's no other way in which they can use other social media platforms.
Exactly.
Because in order to move, if you individually want to move to another social platform, probably you have to move your whole community,
exactly.
right? And what it means to move like a whole community. In the end, no, it's the choices. The choices that we can make are completely different from one perspective to another. And for example, I know many families that if one day, let's say in Europe, as it was being said like many months ago, Facebook disappears from the EU, in which many people were saying, yes, of course, like I will not miss Facebook. But there's a lot of people who have families in other countries that without Facebook, they cannot have communication. So and also like many of the recommendations that you were giving, they were very similar to recommendations that we daily hear here in Brussels. In the end, they are not different. But maybe the people who are thinking about how to create a better development of technologies or a better implementation, they are only thinking about certain kind of people. So maybe we should try to also try to focus more or to be more have a wider perspective of who are the people who should be.
Yeah, I guess at least you have to talk to these communities, to involve them in these solutions. We don't have to talk to ourselves, and that's why, we repeat this. It's not a magic solutions for the problem. As you said, mostly you heard about that before, but I guess the actions is different than this talk. That's.
And you, Maima, how would you reimagine the situation?
So first, in terms of regulation, I'll just give two practical things that we hopefully can hope for in the coming years, and that is, for example, for the EU to regulate companies that are domiciled within its own jurisdictions to ensure that the technologies that are being built are not also used, for example, surveillance techniques in other countries. And this has also been stressed in a recent report by Amnesty International called the Automated Apartheid, wherein it was stressed that some types of surveillance technologies are currently being used by Israel on Palestinian citizens. So that is the first point for the EU, to regulate these companies within its own union and its own jurisdictions. And secondly, this is basically a method that we are also using in my day-to-day job, and it is called Designs from the Margins. It's a method that has been developed by the Balfour Center at the Harvard Kennedy School. And basically it centers the perspectives and needs of marginalized communities within the whole design process to basically foster inclusivity and address systematic inequalities. And, you know, why can this be really helpful? Firstly, because it challenges existing power dynamics. So by giving voice, as has been mentioned by Osama, an agency to marginalized communities, but also it ensures that you're having an inclusive problem definition. So apart from the fact that with the engineering perspective, what we're seeing now is that most of the time we're only building things because we don't want to miss the AI train. Everyone wants to be on top of the AI hype. Sometimes, or most of the time, we're using technological solutions for, social, political, or societal problems. But, you know, it really helps you to create an inclusive problem definition and understand these unique challenges of these marginalized communities through, for example, you know, considering their privacy, their security, their well-being, to ensure that these challenges are taken into account in the whole design process. Because if these challenges of these marginalized communities are taken into account, you'll be sure that these systems that you're building, these measures that you're taking, will be good for all. And lastly, it obviously also empowers them. Indirectly, you are valuing their knowledge, you're valuing their inputs, but you're also valuing their lived experiences, because mostly the lived experiences are not considered as knowledge, because most of the time there are no statistics, there are no numbers, so it's not considered as real knowledge. So to conclude, by centering these needs and these perspectives, you can indirectly contribute to an inclusive to inclusive regulations, to inclusive laws, and also maybe to inclusive technologies that will foster, technology for good for all.
Yeah, and also maybe another ingredient that we can add to the design is care. I mean, how we can design technology with care, which is something that we never think about it. And well, I mean, if there's people who are harmed, maybe we should also think about solutions like care, right? And Naomi, what are your ideas for reimagining technology?
Yeah, thank you. I'll keep it brief, mainly because I fully agree with everything which has been said by Osama and Oumaima so far. The contribution I want to make based on my research is more of an added layer than a completely different or contrasting perspective. So in my research, I mainly asked the question what it means and what the importance is of being able to contest or contestation in the context of oppressive technological system of governance. So when it comes to this question, right, how to reimagine technology that does not harm vulnerable communities, I think this notion of contestation or contestability can be quite insightful in two different ways. On the one hand, more of a methodology for even uncovering what or getting understanding of what the harm is. But on the other hand, also as more of a design notion, a bit in line with what Oumaima just spoke about. I'll briefly just touch upon both. So as a methodology for understanding the harm of these technological systems for vulnerable groups, the first way of thinking about this is just ridiculously easy, in the sense of listening to people who are currently challenging or resisting or contesting a certain technology. And if people in power would just simply do that, listen, and belief, people who are trying to raise issues about a certain technological system, that would already, of course, be quite revolutionary. Then it can also be a methodology in the sense of asking who is not able to contest, who is not able to challenge a specific technological system. I think this point is quite important because often if we're evaluating a technological system, we either look for legal norms or we evaluate a technology based on its own standards, right? Just to make it concrete, we can say, oh, there cannot possibly be a privacy harm because it's fully GDPR compliant. Or we can say, we audited the algorithm and there is no difference in data collection between different groups, so there's no privacy harm, right? So that way of thinking you see a lot. But rather than this legal or technological approach, if we ask who is and who is not able to contest or influence the different elements or parts or impacts of a system, can reveal a lot about the power dynamics in a specific context. Then, on the other hand, I also mentioned that contestation can be seen as a guiding notion in developing or implementing or throughout the governance of systems. And to continue Oumaima's bubble bursting trajectory, this idea is very much based on the notion that no system, whether it be technological or not, is going to be perfect or free of harm. Living in the world and the society we are living in, primarily based on extractive capitalist logics, rife with forms of sexism, racism, and other types of social injustices, we cannot start from the position that we're going to develop a perfect system that works for everyone everywhere and there's going to be no harm. And if we move or start from the perspective of there is going to be some harm somewhere down the road given the society we live in, that really brings home the importance of continuously thinking about, okay, then how and where and when and who is able to challenge or surface these harms if they do arise. And in that way, contestability in a concrete context can also be a guiding value. So in a way, I think what I'm doing is making a call for also focusing on resistance as opposed to justice in our thinking about a better world.
Maybe Tebogo, you would also like to add something to what the other colleagues said also?
Thank you. So at the beginning, I consciously started with the importance of recognizing the human dignity of our fellow human beings. I think that's where it starts, right? Because the othering, looking down upon, the judging starts from not recognizing that we're actually all fellow travelers in this world, right? And we all have sort of a born, innate right to be here and to exercise our human dignity, irrespective of anything else. I think once it starts there, that mindset, and of course I totally agree with the inclusive design, because just like compliance, I think when one wants to make a change to any system or technology, it has to be from the onset. So we don't include people from marginalized groups only when testing. It's actually when the concept begins. I think it has to be right from the onset. And it's also been seen that some technologies do become better, more inclusive, less discriminatory when it's inclusive from the onset. But I think even to be open to that is just to recognize other human beings as fellow human beings. I think that's where it starts, and that we'll talk about to the implementation. I think if the authorities would see Osama as a human being, they would not have, maybe I'm too idealistic, but they wouldn't have made him gone through what they did. So I think we just have to go back to basics again. Sometimes we just forget that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Tebogo. And also, maybe just to wrap up, as we would like to answer to some questions, if possible. I think that in the end, one thing that maybe, I don't know if you agree, all of you, but maybe the essence of data privacy goes beyond technology. I mean, we are calling it data privacy because now it's the name, but maybe in 10 years it's another name that we give to this concept. I mean, in the end, it's privacy. And in the end, as you were saying, it's part of our human dignity. It's what gives you or what provides us as a human being also, right? To have our space, because that is also privacy. Like to have our space, and if we want to keep it private, if we want to keep it for us, or if we want to consume it ourselves and eat it ourselves, I mean, to be something that it's also like another option, right? I mean, we don't have to share everything with everyone because we can do it. But if we do it, at least that there's people who, or at least have like certain kind of regulations or certain kind of methodologies in which we know that that information, if we wanted to keep it for ourselves once we want, like that is possible, right? And especially when we know that marginalized communities are the ones who, once they are harmed, they are the ones who suffer the most. It is something that also we should try to find, I mean, to acknowledge. I mean, it is completely different if you are in a position of being nervous because of your situation, in that necessity of or in a certain kind of needs, for example. Like it's completely different that if you are trying to decide on something that in the end it is something that you do every day, and that it doesn't provide you like a really big challenge, right, in your life. But by accessing, for example, those certain social platforms in order to continue with your daily life, or trying to have, because probably many times they are even faking their lives, as many of us we do in social media. They are still in risk. They are risking their lives in order to say, hey, I'm alive, like my life continues in another place, in another country, in another dream, right? So I think that maybe we can start, if any of you have questions, if that, to be honest, I would like questions, and if in any case someone wants to share any personal story, we can share them after with some drinks after. Okay, we have 1, 2. Okay, so 3. Okay, so yeah, we have 1, 2, 3. So Jill, maybe you can take the mic from there.
Of course, it's too tall for me. Thank you all for a very like powerful and wonderful panel. I think maybe my starting point is I think I'm a law skeptic. That's where my position is. Also, just because the history of Europe using law as a tool to demarcate who is actually fully human or not, which still continues today. And the whole idea of European values, of who even constitutes or is seen as European. So I guess I think really much building on the second part of the panel, I think my question is that fundamentally what we're talking about, power and who is allowed to have some part of that power. So in anyone on the panel, I guess my question is very much on if we're focusing on acts and practices of resistance, as Naomi has mentioned, where does the role of law fit within those acts of resistance, and how do particular marginalized communities who also have agency, obviously not all, but there is agency in that, how do they, I guess, use the law? What is the role of law that can help these communities build power? Thank you.
Maybe Oumaima or Naomi?
I think this is an incredibly difficult question that I struggle with myself a lot. You can answer it on different levels, right? You can go very theoretical. What is law? What does it do? But you can also go very practical. And I think the best answer that I could give is the same answer to any type of methodology question for social change, in the sense that you need a diversity of methods, and you need to do what you can, right? You can have very principled ideas about what the law is and what it's not, but at the same time, not everyone can choose, and you need your basic rights, and people need to fight for that. but at the same time, we know it's not enough. Oumaima very clearly explained that it's not enough. So you need to do these things in parallel. I don't think it's like a temporal thing, but you just need to do it all at once. It's not really an answer.
Gabe, I think you have also a question. It's nice because I know the name of all the people who are speaking. I mean, themselves, they are the ones who are asking. I mean, it's not well prepared at all.
Thank you. My name is Kave, as you said. I represent the European Disability Forum, and I work as a policy officer there, so I see that we are also representing a vulnerable group. And I also want to thank for a very interesting discussion. And my question is, what would be the panels, like anybody who wants to answer, what would be your view on regulatory sandboxes? So just to give a very short thing, it's like, since we need to train AI and maybe to remove bias, many times it can be necessary to process sensitive personal data. And it's my understanding that regulatory sandboxes would be an environment where AI developers can, under some kind of guidance from authorities, test these, and they try to put like safeguards that you cannot use the test data outside the sandbox. My organization doesn't have a position, but I'm still on a personal level struggling to see. At one hand, we do want non-discriminatory AI applications to be developed, but on the other hand, I also don't want to be like a lab rat where my personal data is used for experimentation. So I would like to just hear your comments or ideas about the concept and if it's good or bad.
Thank you, Gab.
Can I ask a question before you sit down? How come you choose authorities to be the people to provide guidance? Because isn't that often where the problem is with the unjust implementation of just laws? So I'm just wondering what your thought process was to have people from government or authorities provide guidance of what happens in the sandbox.
I think that's how I understood how they are proposing in the European Parliament's position that they formed in the committees when they voted on it. But spontaneously, I would say it really depends on the mindset of the authority, because if it's, I don't know, some authorities can still be more favorable towards minorities, like anti-discrimination organizations. I know they have flaws, but I mean, compared to other authorities.
So, Oumaima, maybe you want to?
Yeah, I would say that is something that I struggle with a lot as well, because, for example, in my context, in my day-to-day job, my students, this is also something that we often discuss, that what if we had a lab wherein we could just try everything and see what the potential negative impact could be, so that we could learn from these, from these examples or from these negative outputs that we shouldn't eventually be using. But then what I really struggle with is that, well, first of all, I really don't think that it could be positive, because it might maybe even open doors to new negative outputs that we're not even aware of. So that is the first thing. The second thing is that I really believe that it's all about the values that are being embedded into the system. Because again, for example, if you look at bias it's not a technical problem. Bias is a social, political, a societal problem that we have. So it is not going to be solved by debiasing the system or by maybe trying to use other data types and see if the system can be more favorable for some groups and others. Eventually, the bias, the only way to really get rid of that bias is to, for example, have a diverse set of people that are sitting on the board and that are building these technologies. People that understand that these technologies that they are building will have an impact on society and might maybe even marginalize some groups even further. So I would say, if you know that if you play with a weapon, it can give you several outputs, you will not even try it. So why are we giving ourselves this room? And again, this is a luxury. Why are we, or do we want to give ourselves this room to to experiment with these type of technologies, or maybe with different data types or whatsoever. I would say that, and specifically in the context of education, I would really say that that is something that we shouldn't be focusing on right now, because the thing that we should be focusing on right now is that we ensure that these data scientists of the future, these AI engineers of the futures, that they are equipped with skills, with certain type of skills, so that they can critically reflect and evaluate on these technologies that they're building. And again, it shouldn't also be a checklist. They should be critically reflecting about these technologies throughout the whole process. And that is something that we see in our day-to-day job, something that is really difficult to learn to these data scientists, because they come into the classroom and they're like, I'm here to build models. I don't want to philosophize with you about ethics. Leave me alone. But then again, they have to realize that, you know, maybe once upon a time we had the doctors and the lawyers, but now the data scientists and the AI engineers, they are on the front lines of our society. So I would say let's put more effort in that part, and maybe leave the experimenting for now, for a later stage. But again, it's something I struggle with as well.
Maybe Tebogo, you also have.
Yeah, just a very brief follow-up question in the form of who is doing the experimenting, with what aims, right? Like, is it part of a business model, a for-profit product being developed or not? I think that matters.
So the reason I asked the follow-up question, who is providing guidance, I think that's critical, right? Because if it's the same people who ensure that these aspirational laws don't reach the people that it should, then they shouldn't be the ones providing guidance. That's the sort of, that was my way of thinking, right? But speaks to exactly saying about diversity and inclusivity, and actually to a point if that's really a priority now.
There was another question here on my left.
Hi, hello. Thank you for a great panel. My question is in relation to, I think, Tebogo, you mentioned Article 5, prohibited AI systems. My question is in relation to the new amendments by the European Parliament. They have included vulnerable people. However, they did not mention any of the protected characteristics like gender or sexual orientation. So I was wondering, you and anyone of the panel, like, what are your opinions about this amendment, and whether it's a good approach or a good direction to combating such an important issue? So thank you.
Sorry, what's your name and where's your organization?
Oh yeah, definitely. Sorry. I'm Alexa Zainer from Leiden University.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your question. And that's something I mentioned in passing, and maybe I should have stopped there longer, because that's something that definitely I noticed, right? That the range of vulnerable groups, I think, was age, mental and physical disability, and that's it, right? And that was part of the worrying for me, and of almost doubting or lessened hope that will actually also protect where it should. But well spotted. I agree with you that it's definitely not enough, and maybe it's very revealing, you know, of maybe not enough vulnerabilities representation in lawmaking, or not acknowledging that vulnerability is also very complex, right? Because there are also intersections, right? So it's not only on those bases as are protected in a fundamental, sort of as fundamental rights. But yeah, so no, I see that as highly problematic. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and also I think that as we are evolving as humans, probably there will be more vulnerabilities that we will be having in the future. So I think that by limiting our vulnerabilities as human beings, we are limiting ourselves. So so it's something that I don't know, like in the end, like how we can, one, make sure that everyone understands the same when we are speaking about vulnerable people or marginalized people, and at the same time how we can address, because in the end it is not about putting one name or the other, it is what we are doing in order to make this word disappear. Because maybe this word, like, we want always to reinforce that, hey, we are so good that we also think about vulnerable people, right? Because if not, it seems like, okay, we are good, but not enough if we don't try to help someone who's under, who has less privileges than us, or who is another completely different position to where we are, right? So yeah. I don't know if there's one, we have time for one more question and one super, just in case. I don't see if there's, yeah. No, so I think that there's no more questions. Thank you all for your patience, for being here, and I hope that you can, that we can have a chat after, like reach out to us if you're interested in learning or listening more to our stories. And yeah, thank you and congratulations for the first day of the conference.